Hi, just a bit of a continuation, from yesterday, from the video about the burden of proof, shifting the burden of proof. This is about the logic of disproof and about syllogisms and stuff like that. About the denying the consequence and stuff like that. Fair use, educational purposes. I know it only applies to the person. I'm not a person. I'm a man. I'm very much alive. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave a link in the description at the end when I upload it, so you can go and have a look at this bit. Although there's a link in the description from the video yesterday that I did. This is just the end of that video. From the City University of New York. The logic of disproof. The following is a perfectly reasonable way to reach a conclusion. In fact, the pattern is known as valid, meaning that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Premise P, Q, premise not Q, therefore premise not P. This pattern of reasoning is known as denying the consequent, or modus tollens. Here it is with some meaningful statements in the place of the P and the Q. Premise. If there is a fire burning in room 442, then they have oxygen present in room 442. Well, that's the air, but yeah. I'll change that to air present. So if there's a fire burning in room 442, then you have air present in room 442. That's your major premise. Your minor premise would be there is no air in room 442. So your conclusion would be, therefore, there is no fire burning in room 442. So if there's no air in room 442 and you need air in room 442 for the fire to be burning, then the room 442 cannot have a fire burning in it. If premises 1 and 2 are true, the conclusion must be true. Are they true? If so, then the conclusion is true. As a fire is rapid oxidation and absence of oxygen makes a fire impossible. I'd say it's rapid aeration and the absence of air makes fire impossible. Premise F then O is making the claim that the O is necessary for the F. So it's saying, well, let's just say F then fire then air. So F then A is making the claim that air is necessary for the fire. It claims the fire is sufficient to know there is the air. It is a mistake to confuse a necessary for a sufficient condition and to argue this way. Premise P, Q, premise Q, conclusion, therefore P. This mistake is called a fallacy and has the name of affirming the consequent. Nevertheless, a good deal of thinking proceeded with this pattern in science. If the hypothesis is correct, then we will observe what the hypothesis would predict. If we do observe what was predicted, then the conclusion is at least partially supported by the hypothesis is correct. If major premise, if H, then O. Minor premise, O. Conclusion, H. Science moves forward with greater degree of probability of the conclusion being true through the use of modus tollens, which disproves an hypothesis or refutes a claim. If H, then O, not H. But even then, there might have been something not quite correct in the hypothesis, or some auxiliary hypothesis or assumption. See, there you go, you've got assumptions. You shouldn't assume anything being made that is being disproven, and I think that's supposed to say not the hypothesis. Perhaps there was the assumption that the measuring being done would be accurate, or the devices being used would all function properly, and so on. Function correctly. That's a proper word to use there. Devices being used would all function correctly, and so on. Not properly, it's not proper grammar. More testing of the hypotheses is generally in order to rule out the other explanations for not detecting the predicted results. The logic of proving a negative or non-existence of some x. So, major premise. If the globe exists, then you would observe curvature. Yeah? So we're going to change this from if x exists, then you would observe O. We do not observe O, therefore x does not exist. So we'd say if the globe exists, then you would observe measurable curvature. You would observe curvature. We do not observe curvature, so the conclusion would be the globe does not exist. This pattern is valid. And now what a individual would need to check is whether or not the premises are true. So the major premise would be, like I said, if the globe exists, then you would observe curvature. Yeah? Well, we know that to be the case. If you live on a globe, there has to be measurable curvature. Yeah? They say, oh, well, you're too small and the Earth's too big. No, but you use the Pythagorean theorem, and then you're taking the other stuff into account a bit as well. But the Pythagorean theorem gives you a rough idea of what should be there, what the curvature should be, and everything else, right? So basically, use the Pythagorean theorem to measure for the curvature. We don't see any curvature. We can't measure the curvature. We've got the angular resolution limit. We've got other factors going on, but it's not curvature. It's perspective and everything else. That's the imaginary curve. Yeah. So if the globe exists, then you would observe curvature. You'd have to. If you lived on a globe, there would be measurable, observable curvature in all directions, all around you. Yeah? From left to right, front to back, all around. It would be falling away from you in all directions. Yeah? Because they say you're always on top of the globe. No matter where you are, you're always on top of the globe. So basically, you'd see curvature all around you. Yeah? So if the globe exists, then you would observe curvature. That goes without saying. We know that's true. Yeah? So then the minor premise would be, we do not observe curvature. I've tried, other people have tried, it's been done time and time and time again. There's videos on my channel showing that there's no measurable curvature. If you check out the one that's called Beyond the Imaginary Curve, Globe Busting Observations. Yeah? You can actually see something 39 miles away. You can see the reflection of it on the water, which proves and shows that it's a solid object. You're actually seeing the little island thing there, because it's leaving its own reflection on the water. So you can see the water all the way up to it. There's no curvature whatsoever at 39 miles, when there should be near about 1,000 feet of curve. Yeah, by using the Pythagorean theorem, just over 1,000 feet. So you should only see just the top sliver of that island. Yeah, a couple 100-foot top sliver of that island, when you can see the whole thing and the reflection of it on the water. Yeah. So we do not observe curvature. Yeah, which is true. So the conclusion would be that the globe doesn't exist. Yeah, that's valid, and we know that the premises are true. Yeah. So if the X is a tooth fairy, or the Easter Bunny, or Santa Claus, then there are certain observations that should be made. Yeah. Not ever making those observations, despite numerous attempts, would lead most individuals to conclude that there is no tooth fairy or Easter Bunny or Santa Claus, only individuals posing as such. However, if the X is some supernatural being or spirit, such as a deity or a ghost, or even an event claimed to have a supernatural source, those who wish to hold for the existence of such beings are not so willing to accept that the existence of the being in reality is disproven and that the being does not exist in reality. What happens? So the premise, if deity D exists, then observe the events O. So that's the major premise. The minor premise would be no observation of O. So the conclusion is there is no deity. Yeah. This would be a valid argument pattern. So if the premises are true, the conclusion would be proven to be true. However, those who want to hold to the existence of D, of a deities, will introduce auxiliary claims so that the failure to observe O does not disprove the existence of D. Example, premise. This is your major premise. If yellow monkeys in the jungle J exist, then you will observe the yellow monkeys in jungle J. So the minor premise would be no observation of yellow monkeys in the jungle J occurs. So the conclusion there would be there are no yellow monkeys in the jungle J. This would be a valid argument pattern. So if the premises are true, the conclusion would be proven to be true. However, those who want to hold to the existence of yellow monkeys in the jungle J will introduce auxiliary claims so that the failure to observe O does not disprove the existence of yellow monkeys in the jungle J. So we could say the major premise, let me think, if if curvature exists on the Earth, then you will observe curvature on the Earth. That would be your major premise. Your minor premise was there's no observation of curvature on the Earth occurs. So conclusion would be there's no curvature on the Earth. Yeah? The major premise, if yellow monkeys in the Jungle J exist and it is a rainy Tuesday, then you will observe the yellow monkeys in Jungle J. Premise, no observation of yellow monkeys in the Jungle J occurs on rainy Tuesdays, when observations are carried out. Conclusion, there were no yellow monkeys in the Jungle J. That would appear to disprove the existence of the yellow monkeys in the Jungle J, except that the believer in the yellow monkeys in Jungle J can offer another auxiliary hypothesis or claim. So it's moving the goalposts, basically. There's no bit about yellow monkeys, and I'm not going to... So the individual who wants to believe in yellow monkeys in the Jungle J exist, can continue to believe in them and claim that they do exist even with no evidence to support the claim, or evidence that goes against the claim. The person who wants to believe in yellow monkeys in the Jungle J exist will claim that they do not... will claim that you do not prove that there were no... You did not prove that there were no yellow monkeys in the Jungle J, until the person can go on believing that there are yellow monkeys in the jungle. Yeah? Now substitute a supernatural being of any kind into the position held by the yellow monkeys in Jungle J in the arguments above, and you shouldn't be able to understand why it is so difficult to prove a negative claim. So person B claims that deity D exists. Person B does not offer any convincing arguments. So individual B, see I didn't again use that word person. Individual B claims that deity D exists. Individual B does not offer any convincing arguments or evidence or proof that D exists, but shifts the burden of proof and claims that D exists unless it can be proven that D does not exist. An attempt to prove that D does not exist might take this form. Let O be the observation of the deity itself. So if deity D exists, then observe the events O. That's your major premise. Your minor premise would be no observation of O. So the conclusion is there is no deity. Now the person who claims that D does exist can alter the position in this manner. Major premise. If deity D exists and wants to be observed, then we observe the events O. The minor premise, no observation of O. Conclusion, there is no deity that wants to be observed. See what they've done there? They say, no, well, you can't see the deity because it doesn't want to be observed. Yeah? So by introducing features into the initial premise, the attempt to disprove the existence of D is thwarted. All manner of post hoc explanations can be offered to explain what was observed. For example, the claim could be made that deity D wants people to accept the existence of D as an act of faith in D, and so does make the existence of D obvious or observable. This process can be repeated in many different ways. This makes the attempt to disprove the existence of D very difficult, if not impossible. So we could say the same thing about the globe. So by introducing features into the initial premise, the attempt to disprove the existence of the globe is thwarted. All manners of post hoc explanations can be offered to explain what was observed. For example, the claim could be made that the globe wants people to accept the existence of the globe as an act of faith, and so does not make the existence of the globe obvious or observable. Yeah, well, you know what I mean. This was something negative claim or the non-existence of something. The burden of proof is on the positive claim. This stands to reason. This makes sense. This placement of the burden of proof makes reason discourse possible. Or now let the deity, let's look at deities again. I'm not gonna. Well, this would not prove there was no deity. If you cannot prove that the globe does not exist, then the globe does exist. If you cannot prove that the globe is false, then the globe is true. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. False dilemma or non-exhaustive alternatives. There is the mistake of thinking that there are only two alternatives of a false dilemma. Premise 1. Either X exists or X does not exist. Premise 2. You cannot prove that X does not exist, so the conclusion X does exist. Or major premise, premise 1, either X exists or X does not exist. Premise 2, minor premise, you cannot prove that X does exist. Conclusion, X does not exist. There is a valid pattern. Premise 1, either A or B. Premise 2, you prove it is not A. Conclusion, it must be B. So, the major premise would be it's either a globe or the loaded term flat earth, right? Or level plane, whatever you want to call it, right? But then the premise 2 would be you prove it's not a globe. We've proved it's not a globe. So the conclusion must be it's a level plane. Yeah. The mistake is making it appear that the valid pattern is being used when it is not, because the first premise of the valid pattern is not true. Premise 1, either X exists or X does not exist. Premise 2, you cannot prove that X does exist, so the conclusion X does not exist. Should be premise 1, either A, these are the options that you should be having. So it's either the globe exists and we know it, or the globe exists but we do not know it, or the globe does not exist and we know it, or the globe does not exist and we do not know it. You cannot prove that X does exist. What conclusion would follow from this? Either B or D. So the conclusion from that would be either the globe exists but we do not know it, or the globe does not exist and we do not know it. Conclusion. We do not know what we do not know, and it is a mistake to conclude that we do know something when we do not know it. With a lack of knowledge, we cannot reach a definite conclusion. Individuals need to proceed carefully in reaching conclusions. There should be evidence to support conclusions. Individuals need to be patient and accept ignorance and hope it is temporary and work to acquire more evidence and proof and knowledge. There is the continuing process of careful and critical inquiry that has moved individuals to the acquisition of reliable claims of knowledge. Individuals who hope to return their rationality and the value it has proved to the species would do well to observe the principle of the burden of proof. And then that's it. Then it's just going to give you more things you can go and look at. Let's quick this one here. Burden of proof in philosophy. The burden of proof, Latin, onus probondi. It's shortened from onus probondi incumbit e vi dicit non e vi negat. It's an obligation on a party in a dispute to provide sufficient warrant for their position. Holder of the burden. When two parties are in a discussion and one makes a claim that the other disputes, like the globe earth is the claim, people like me are disputing that, denying it and asking for questioning it. The one who makes the claim typically has the burden of proof to justify or substantiate that claim, especially when it challenges a perceived status quo. Yeah? So the globe is the affirmative claim. Yeah? So the burden of proof is on the claim. It's not on anyone else to disprove the claim or say, and when they say, well, what have you done to be able to deny the claim? It's not important what I've done to deny the claim. What's important is the burden of proof is on you. So prove your claim. Show it practically. This is also stated in Hitchens's Razor. Carl Sagan proposed a related criteria on the Sagan standard. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, or proof. While certain kinds of arguments, such as logical syllogisms, require mathematical or strictly logical proofs, the standard of evidence to meet the burden of proof is usually determined by context and community standards and conventions. Philosophical debate can devolve into arguing about who has the burden of proof. Not that it's a debate, you can't debate objective reality, but we get this a lot, where it devolves into arguing about who has the burden of proof when you've got these trolls about a particular claim. This has been described as burden tennis, or the onus game. Shifting the burden of proof. One way in which one would attempt to shift the burden of proof is by committing a logical fallacy known as the argument from ignorance. It occurs when either a proposition is assumed to be true because it has not yet been proved false, or a proposition is assumed to be false because it has not yet been proved true. Proving a negative. A negative claim is a colloquialism for an affirmative claim that asserts the non-existence or exclusion of something. Saying you cannot prove a negative has been called pseudo-logic because there are many proofs that substantiate negative claims in mathematics, science, and economics, including Arrow's impossibility theorem, multiple claims within a debate. Nevertheless, being said, whoever makes a claim carries a burden of proof, regardless of positive or negative content in the claim. Negative claim may or may not exist as a counterpoint to a previous claim. A proof of impossibility or an evidence of absence argument are typical methods to fulfill the burden of proof for a negative claim. And the burden of proof is also an important concept in the public arena of ideas. Once participants in discourse establish common assumptions, the mechanism of burden of proof helps to ensure that all parties contribute productively using relevant arguments. It's not a debate or anything anyway. You can't debate. It's not about ideas or anything like that. It's about objective reality, and it's different in law. It tells you about what it is in law, in statistics, stuff like that. An example here. I'm gonna leave a link to these anyway. I think that's it for this one. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.